Lynam. I'm originally from New York. I live in Tokyo. I've been living in Tokyo for 12 years. I run a design studio. We do like a mix of like identity, some type design. We designed the interior graphic design scheme for both Google and YouTube's offices in Tokyo and a bunch of other stuff. I teach at two schools there. I teach at Temple University, Japan, and a school called Meme Design School. I'm also co-chair at Vermont College of Fine Arts MFA program in graphic design based in beautiful Montpelier, Vermont. This is it. It's very like this beautiful John Irving-esque setting. We are a low residency master's degree program with both 2- and 3-year tracks. We have one of the best blogs about graphic design running today. It's called Perpetual Beta. The URL is there. Highly recommend checking it out. And I'm currently on my way to our fall residency, where we'll be joined by John Sueda and Eris Shireen for 1 week of total intensity. Our residencies are kind of like summer camp meets boot camp, but all around design. But another big thing is that we have a singular focus on the growth of our students. If you've ever thought about getting a master's degree, I cannot state enough how strong our program is. Our curriculum allows students to develop individualized study plans, thereby addressing aspects of design that are important to them and that support individuals' particular interests, values, and goals. Additionally, part of the official hiring policy at VCFA is no assholes. So we exist to rectify the pedagogical damage wrought upon the world and to provide the best quality design education possible. Basically, VCFA covered my travel costs here, so little commercial plug for them. And with that, I'll jump into tonight's presentation. So in the last paragraph of the final interview in the 2012 publication, Work from California, a collection of graphic design work from California, exhibited at the 2012 Brno Biennial in the Czech Republic, British expatriate designer and educator Michael Worthington sums up design work from California with these words, quote, "If it was happening anywhere else, it would seem fake, but somehow it seems right at home in California. I blame the sun." The history of Japanese graphic design is something that is really a mystery to most of the world. It looks a certain way, but most people don't understand why. The legacy of graphic design in Japan after the Meiji Restoration and the opening of the country led to a panoply of aesthetic influences from both the West and the East. So, all right, question for everybody here. How many people here have taken a Japanese graphic design history class? Yeah, where do you live, young lady? Japan. That's my colleague over there. She's awesome. Yeah, it's not something that's taught in the US. So I first moved to Japan in '96, and for me, like I've always viewed visual culture in Japan internally as kind of like post-California, escaping the American imperative of manifest destiny. When I moved to Japan from California in 2004, I experienced a form of slippage from kind of one empire to another, one where post-Fordist interdependencies are viscerally exposed, and the foreigner can never fully integrate. This move helped both fully cement my own true inner radicalism and solidify my disappointment by the vaporous aroma of what is offered in the American West and its mythos of cacti, lonesome highways, secret utopias, attempts at communalism, and highways dotted with palm trees. A disappointment preceded by the stuffiness and conservatism of the American East. My research into Japanese graphic design history has helped me construct narrative themes within a continuum that is poorly documented abroad. With this lecture, I would like to outline the emergence of modernism in Japanese graphic design from the late 1800s through 1965, including the design for the 1940 and 1964 Olympics, as important moments via history, aesthetics, and political economy. So history, aesthetics, and political economy, these are the three lenses through which I look at graphic design, both in my teaching, my writing, and professional practice. Most folks outside of Japan don't have a real grasp of Japanese design history, and most folks don't have a sense of the overarching history, so we're just going to dive in. This is the most academically I will speak throughout this lecture, so don't worry, you're safe. So if we could hold questions until the end, that'd be great. Thank you. So Japan opened to the world in 1854, and for the first time really encouraged trade and cultural exchange with the West and the East. This is often why early modern Japanese graphic design seems so confusing to design historians. Japan's period use of classical Western and Eastern design motifs only really got going in the late 1860s. And this compression of time and aesthetics helps to define so much of why early Japanese design looks the way it does. As Japan has such a rich visual history, locating an entry point for discussing the advent of graphic design is quite difficult. If you're talking about graphic arts, you can go way, 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 way back. But defining graphic design, usually typography and some type of visual form synthesized together, right? And typography usually has some kind of movable type involved, but we'll get to that in a minute. So like, if you were looking from a graphic arts perspective, you could use something like this. These are called pochibukuro. Pochibukuro are small gift-giving envelopes for money. Or you could look at what are called senjafuda, which are kind of like family-based kind of proto-graffiti seals used to mark shrines. But I personally define the advent of Japanese graphic design as starting with the rise of movable type. And as movable type is so much a part of graphic design, I'm choosing to start here in this presentation. So this guy with the amazing hair, his name is Shozo Motoki. And if you're going to start talking about typography in Japan, he is the person to talk about. He developed Japan's first sustainable system of movable type technology for printing and Japan's first typography school in 1869. Basically, there was an Irish-American missionary named William Gamble who was working in China and developed a system for making type which differs from the Latin model. And Gamble came to Nagasaki, where Shozo Motoki lived, and they wound up working together. Shozo formed what was basically, it translates into the New City Letterpress Workshop in Nagasaki. And with a student of his named Hirano Tomiji, they formed the Tsukiji Type Foundry in Tokyo. Both the New City Letterpress Workshop and the Tsukiji Type Foundry were Japan's first true type foundries. Both were innovators in creating multiple sets of type and introducing movable Latin types into the Japanese printing industry. So these are some early Tsukiji types. The thing is, these are the kana forms. Japanese has multiple parts of the language. You have kanji, which is then subdivided into a number of other different sets. We tend to generally think of them as ideographs. But then these are syllabic-based. They're syllable-based. And basically, the first kanji-based Japanese type that was made was based on models from the French National Library. Whereas the indigenous Japanese forms that were syllabic were created in-house at the Tsukiji Type Foundry. And they really helped imbue the typeset Japanese visual language with its own distinctive form. So the way that they made type in the West was, you would use a counterpunch to knock out the negative shape of a letter and then carve around it. And this is very much shorthand here, in order to create metal type essentially out of steel and then lead. But Tsukiji types were different because what they would do is carve the type out of wood. And then they would use an electroplating method, usually using a zinc plate and a vacuum and an electric charge, to then apply a metal surface to the wooden type. Because you can carve wood a lot faster than you can carve metal. So this is an advertisement from 1904 for the Tsukiji Type Foundry showing off their skill at Latin type design and typesetting. They were super, super good at it. They also provided basically printing services as well. This is a publication that they published called the Koka, which refers to an idealized Japanese nation state. And it's one of the earliest international journals from Asia of both commercial and fine art. So this company's initial rise helped create and form public conceptions of graphic design as a pro-social activity that holistically engaged all aspects of commerce. Unfortunately, in 1923, there was a giant earthquake which totally destroyed the Tsukiji type foundry, and they were unable to rebuild. But at the same time, there were other type foundries that saw how successful they were and had built up quite a big business and were able to rebuild financially. Foremost was a company called Shueisha, which integrated printing, design, and typographic services. And now they've changed their name. They're called the Dai Nippon Printing Company. And they're kind of like the Walt Disney of printing in Japan. And they started in 1876. Then there's another one called Toppon Printing Company, which integrated in 1900. And both of these companies still dominate the contemporary printing industry in Japan. So modernity and the rise of graphic design were very much a part of corporate culture as an area of cultural practice in Japan, and are so today. And I thought we could take a look at an array of different types of graphic design as applied to packaging from this moment in time when Japan was modernizing. All right, so question for you guys. Feel free to jump in here. Do you guys see influence from other countries here? Can you identify anything? Anyone? Feel free to jump in. Just jump in. It's okay. It's chill. Russia? Where? Maybe. Yeah, I could. I don't know. I mean, like the type at the top is maybe French influenced, maybe British influenced. This grotesque type below looks like kind of an early Salon model. This splash that's happening behind is definitely from the American sign painting tradition. So there's a whole, and then this character as well is from the tradition of Japanese ukiyo-e, or printmaking, or comics. Just basically, when we see early Japanese stuff, early Japanese modern stuff, there's a mix of assorted cultures work there. But it's something that a lot of folks don't recognize until they see stuff that looks kind of more like modern or modern. So here's some other, these are kind of like camphor, or what are they called? Mothballs. So this is mothball packaging. And you can see like there's some Chinese influence in some of it as well, and then some influence from the West. And that's the one thing about early modern Japanese design. A lot of folks, particularly folks who have published stuff about it, they try to just be like, oh no, the Japanese just took European stuff and threw it in there. But that's not true. There were influences from the East as well. Here's some soap packaging. And I'd like to note the decorative ornament and Baroque elements around the traditional, like Asian elements. Try to remember this slide, because we're going to loop back to this later. Cool? Then some of my favorites are Japanese matchboxes, early ones. So this is like why a chicken and a gun together. Pretty amazing. And then like, why is that cat throwing balls in the lion's mouth? Okay, and now the $100 challenge. And this is a challenge to everyone here in the room. I hereby, okay, $100. If you can find a more utterly sweet, awesome, super cute platypus in the history of Japanese graphic design, I will give you $100. That's a real challenge. All right? All right.
What year is it?
Sorry?
What year?
This is like probably like 1910-ish.
So the whole relationship to Art Nouveau that was influenced by Japanese robotics, they're all kind of back and forth.
It is. Can we talk about that at the end? Because if we do Q&A, there's no way I'm going to do this in 40 minutes. Is that cool?
I just was interested in that period.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, there was an interplay back and forth. Just basically, primarily, German buyers were buying Japanese prints, bringing them in, reselling them in the French market, and then they were, replicating a lot of the patterns from that time, and then that helped influence Alphonse Mucha's work and other people. And then, so you had the Japonismo, and then that was resold to the Japanese market, and then they would copy the Japonismo, and then that would go back, and it's like this ping-pong back and forth interplay of cultural influence. Cool? Okay, sweet. That's an OG turducken. So, as for people who were making these kind of designs, there were two giant stars at the beginning. So the first was a gentleman named Sugiura Hisui, and what's really interesting about this early period of Japanese graphic design was that graphic design and the rise of the department store were happening kind of at the same time. Because we think about department stores and we're like, oh yeah, it's a department store, whatever. But at that time, this was a really an innovative thing globally as well as in Japan, because you had what was kind of like you had you could do your like retail shopping, but also you had exhibition spaces and cafes and salons, like truly public spaces opening up for the first time where people from different classes could integrate. And these department stores would hire graphic designers like Sugiura Hisui to head up their promotional departments. So he did a lot of design both for the Mitsukoshi department store, one of the earliest department stores in Japan, as well as he did a lot of like promotional design for travel industries. And then this was a poster that he did in 1927 called "The Only Subway in the East," so dedicated to the first subway in Japan. And here on the left, we have some of his travel stuff. And he was super interested in fine art and design as well. At this time, and still today, there's a used book and book buying center of Tokyo called Jimbocho. And he was going there and picking up copies of like Gebrauch Graphic and like a lot of stuff from Europe and reading that stuff and bringing that influence in as well. There's a store called Naoka, which has been in Jimbocho from that time that's still around today, which is pretty interesting. And Hisui was very interested in design publishing. And he created one of the first journals of Japanese design. This one, the name, the Gendai Shogyo Bijutsu Zenchu, which translates into The Complete Commercial Artist, which was published from 1927 to 1930. And it was super, 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 super important. Both foreign and domestic application of design trends and theories were published within. So we have like an earlier softcover style and a later hardcover style. Individual volumes focused on one or more disciplines, including poster design, advertising, package design, shop signs, billboards, like these kind of prototypes for kiosk designs, some of which are just amazingly beautiful. And each edition was replete with substantial text as well. They were profusely illustrated. And one thing that was really great about these, like on the left of this spread, we have designs from Japan, and on the right, designs from the US. So trying to say like, okay, this is what folks abroad are doing, this is what we are doing. A lot of packaging design. And if you can find them, they were printed with oil-based ink, and the inks have kind of sublimated into the paper. They're just really gorgeous, just really rich. A lot of studies and sketches of architectural ornament, signage. It was just a profoundly influential volume. But Hisui didn't stop there. He moved on and created Japan's first solely graphic design-focused publication, which was called Affiche, meaning posters in French. And it was published from 1927 to 1930. There's the cover of the first issue and the second issue. And this is the first spread of the first issue, which is kind of the manifesto for that magazine. And it was primarily a visual magazine, and they showed a lot of surveys of work. The spread on the left is particularly interesting. Back in the day, firefighting teams in Japan, they would kind of pull a wagon behind them with like a water barrel on it and some like pump systems. But the person in front, the lead fireman, would be basically carrying a pole, and it would have these different type of kind of, I don't know what you would call them, like ornamental emblems on top announcing that they were the firefighters, and they would run through the streets with these. So it's pretty interesting stuff. And then we have some, just documentation of vernacular signage on the right. Sugiura's next publication was called Disegno, which was a journal of design theory published from 1936. And the title, Disegno, is Esperanto for design. It was published by Tama Art University. And it's interesting that Sugiura Hisui both published this magazine. He was one of the founders of Tama Art University. And Tama is still around today, and it's one of the leading art universities in Japan. I think it's just really great that, people always think, oh yeah, like fine art is better than design. But this institution of fine art in Japan was started by a graphic designer. Someone was like, yeah, that's awesome. So, so his influence was really, really immense at that time. Another superstar, and this guy was kind of like the first superstar. His name was Yamana Ayao. He lived from 1897 to 1980. He started off writing poetry and then kind of fell into drawing a lot and becoming a designer. He worked for a publishing company called Platonsha, which means like Plato and Company. And he did a lot of designs for different literary journals at the beginning. He was really influenced by Aubrey Beardsley, and you would see this kind of seep into his work, and then it would go away for a while, and then it would seep in, and then it would go away. And he was really notable for joining the cosmetic company Shiseido at the end of 1928. So Shiseido, if you're not familiar, is a cosmetics company, and they're a juggernaut in the Japanese economy. It incorporated in 1872, and they just owned the majority of the skincare and makeup art market. So, and this was a giant time for marketing to women in Japan, particularly for things that feminized women. Because conceptions of women prior to that time were that women were kind of the good mother, or the loyal daughter, or the good mother, daughter, wife. Yeah, yeah. And then this was kind of like, oh no, but they can be sexy too. And women were like, what? That's crazy. And then, yeah. So like, all right, it's 8 a.m. where I live. I got here yesterday. So just like, take it all with a giant grain of salt. So yeah, basically his design work became the face of what was called the moga, or the modern girl in Japan. It's really, 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 really important. At Shiseido, he kind of defined the company's house style using a mix of Art Deco, Arabesque, Baroque, and minimal modern design treatments for packaging, advertisements, and publications. Like slightly abstracted female forms, delicate Gothic lettering, geometric elements, and calligraphic flourishes. In 2 years, he became Japan's first full-fledged design superstar. And he was like, what's up, Shiseido? I quit. And then he got some other work, and then he went back to Shiseido. And then he was like, worked for a couple of years, and he was like, what's up, Shiseido? I quit. And he had this like ping pong thing where he kept leaving Shiseido and then going back for his whole career, which is pretty interesting. He kind of caught a lot of flack in print because his work was so seminal and so popular. There was a design magazine called Kokokuka, and in a 1929 issue, they basically said he's so popular, because he would do the rare thing of signing his work, and he would sign it in Latin letter forms, A-Y-A-O. And basically, the translation is that Yamana has become so popular that we almost believe there are young ladies out there who believe that they will become modern girls if they simply write out the letters A-Y-A-O of his name and then swallow the paper. So it's pretty brutal criticism. So the decade prior to his time at Shiseido kind of brought an onslaught of assimilation of distinctively foreign elements. And he took these ideas and refined them and kind of streamlined them and simplified them, subjecting the lettering to both hyper-decorative and also ultra-reductive tendencies. So it's quite beautiful work. And you still see evolved forms of his work today. This is a shopping bag that he designed for the department store and, in America, bookstore chain Kinokuniya. And you'll see it's slightly redesigned, but really based on that original design. You'll see folks trotting around with that today. So when I say design superstar, it was kind of like if you took the popularity of Paul Rand, David Carson, and Stefan Sagmeister, like X3. Like, this guy was huge. 1940 Olympics, that was kind of the next big step in the history of Japanese modernism. So those were the Olympics that never happened, right? So, or didn't happen in Japan. Basically, the Japanese government went crazy and sent out emissaries all over the world to try to get Tokyo to host the Olympics, as well as to buy off other potential host cities, which was pretty interesting. Like, I believe Il Duce, what's that guy's name? Yes, Mussolini. Thank you. Mussolini agreed to be paid off so that the Olympics would not be held in Italy, and Japan was awarded to be the Olympic city. And last year, I wrote an essay called "Why We Should Really Be Concerned About the Identity for the Tokyo Olympics." In that essay, I criticized a public logo competition for the Olympics after the initial logo scandal. You guys have probably know about this. Basically, they had a big logo scandal. And what I forgot was that the Olympic identity in 1940 was also the result of a public design competition. So here we have the first prize from a public competition for not just the logo design, but the whole design of the 1940 Olympics. It's by what's his name? Professor Wada Sanzo. This is going to be the poster for the 1940 Olympics. And here are some of the seals, kind of like proto logos that were going to be designed for the Olympics. But basically, Japan at this time was expanding into Manchuria, and there was a subsequent war with China, and they just kind of realized, oh, we can't pay for the Olympics and wars and imperialism at the same time, and they withdrew their bid for the Olympics. So in 1938, the plans were canceled. So while the Olympics were happening, the design industry of Japan was chugging onward. Let's take a look at some of Japan's leading design magazines from that time, as well as magazines which are not design magazines, but which employed some of Japan's leading designers. So this is one I mentioned earlier, Kokokukai, or Advertising World, which was a diverse commercial art journal which was published from 1926 to 1941. It mixed dynamic multicolor illustrations of lettering, page layouts, signage, and proposed kiosk designs with half-toned imagery of graphic design, interior design, and architecture. Here's a spread from the inside. At the top here on the left, this is really interesting. This is by Yamana Ayao, that second Japanese design superstar. He was like, Futura's kind of cool, but it could be better. So this is his redesign of Futura. For budding type designers, this has never been digitized. So that could be a thing. So here's an interior spread, again, showing Japanese work alongside foreign work. And just a few years later, it would shift a lot. The previous slide, no, it doesn't have a headline. Later ones just basically said commercial art and design, but they changed it to say industrial art and propaganda as Japan's foray into imperialism grew and grew. So another really important magazine was called Nippon, which was a propaganda magazine, not for Japan, but for the rest of the world, underwritten by corporate sponsors like Kanebo Cosmetics and Mitsubishi, which at that time was the manufacturer of Japanese warplanes. Yamana Ayao was the art director, and he was potentially the first Japanese designer billed as an art director. So he did the illustration for this cover on the left, and we saw that kind of Aubrey Beardsley-esque work. So with this shift toward wartime imperialism, he had to kind of make the women look more Japanese. The clothing turned into wafuku, or Japanese clothing, kimono. And yeah, just kind of had to step back from a lot of Western influence. This is one of the difficult, Nippon is really difficult because, it was the mouthpiece for an imperialist nation state, but it was beautifully designed at the same time. But it's also tough because I'm an American, and the Americans were the winner of that war, so we tend to demonize propaganda from the losers of wars as opposed to like glorifying our own domestic efforts. So it's tough. But this magazine, the backstory it gets pretty disturbing. Long and short of it, this is one issue that was devoted to Manchuria, and it talked about harmony between all the races of Manchuria. But in reality, basically POWs and a lot of native peoples in Manchuria were being subjected to a lot of chemical testing for chemical warfare, etc. And the publisher of this magazine, his name was Natori Yunosuke. This is actually him in the lower left, dressed in Manchurian garb, saying like, oh, look how great and peaceful the country that we are dominating is. And that's just super, super rough. So another really important Japanese propaganda magazine was Front, which was published from 1941 to 1945, and it was intensely more militaristic in terms of tone than Nippon. So this is the Navy issue. Photomontage was heavily used throughout. It was similar to publications like Life in the USA in terms of scale, though it kind of used a fair amount of like Russian constructivist photomontage and techniques a la socialist realism. This was the Air Force issue, which was designed by Hara Hiromu. And because it was so big, the format was a bit too large to be effective. It was also printed on really heavy clay-coated paper. So like if you had 100 of these, they were like massively heavy. So distribution was just a total pain in the butt. And essentially, the publication ended toward the end of the war with a whole print run of the final issue being destroyed in an air raid. So moving forward, as far as I can find, this is the last piece of graphic design right before the end of World War II. It's a template poster with handwritten brush lettering on it, which says, quote, "The imperial government conveys, enemy planes have been repelled, we have strong defenses." Post-war, basically, the country is like pretty rocked by war, but graphic design starts rising again. This is one of the first printed pieces that I found in an archive. Basically, the US occupation government reorganized the wards of Tokyo, dividing Tokyo into 22 wards from, I believe, the original 16. And that's kind of crazy. It's like if there were 50 states and the US loses, and then the occupiers decided to divide the country into 60 states. Like, that's phenomenal. So lots of changes. Also elections. This is election advertising. For the first time, women were allowed to vote. So it was a sweeping time of change. But, then pretty quickly, actually, the Americans withdrew. And at the same time, a lot of graphic designers made it through the war, and they just wanted to get back to work. So a lot of influential designers formed the Japanese Advertising Artists Club. It started in 1951, and it was the first and leading organization for designers in Japan. It was national. They had public and private exhibitions and competitions. The first bunch of exhibitions and competitions were basically kind of like mock-ups for fake products because the wartime economy or post-wartime economy hadn't gotten going enough. So it was just kind of like, just a place for people to start organizing and create, how does the AIGA bill itself, like the national organizing body for graphic design in America. So trying to build a similar thing. And as the years rolled on, the JAAC became very powerful. If they had competitions, and if you were a student and you submitted, say, a poster or a packaging design, and you won an award, when you were hired after getting out of school, your salary would be double that of standard hires. So this is a judging session. On the right here, this guy with his mouth open, that's Kamakura Yusaku. He's kind of like the Paul Rand of Japan. And here's another photo of a judging session. Some competition posters. So things were like very graphic at that time. But it was interesting. Kamakura Yusaku, he was perennially a judge, but it was kind of rough for a lot of people because he was often a winner of these competitions. And, the JAAC kept going, and people just kept getting more and more pissed. In 1970, a bunch of students were like, fuck this, and they physically attacked one of the judging sessions, which is like not something that usually goes down in the world of graphic design. So the judges kind of freaked out. There was a lot of back and forth in the design press, and they decided, we're going to stop doing this. So 1970 saw the end of that. But I'm going to skip back a little bit in history to 1952. Another big thing that happened post-war. It's just like, even though that was a giant stretch of time, I have to talk about all the JAAC stuff together so it makes sense. But we're going to step back a little bit. Basically, in 1952, the French-American designer Raymond Loewy designed this package of cigarettes. And when he did it, he published how much he got in terms of a design fee. And it was a fortune at that time. And Japanese designers were like, what? This foreigner got that much money to design some cigarettes? We want that much money. So everybody kind of collectively, not collectively, but individually went to their bosses and we were like, yo, you paid that foreigner so much money. We need more too. So everybody's wages went up practically overnight in 1952. 1955, this was the first internationally recognized exhibition of Japan's top designers. It was called Graphic 55. Here's a list of names. There is one non-Japanese person listed here. Can you identify it? All right, so basically, Yusaku Kamakura was traveling around the US. He met Paul Rand and he invited Paul Rand to come and exhibit with them. Here are some of the designers in the exhibition. Gotta say, these are the raddest poster displays ever. Super, super, super amazing. And this was held at a department store at Takashimaya in 1955. And this exhibition was incredibly well attended. And it really helped introduce the term graphic design, both the term and as a profession worth pursuing to the general Japanese populace. So just day in, day out, hundreds and hundreds of people would file in and check out this exhibition. So here are some other shots of the exhibition. So the other thing about this exhibition was that it didn't just focus on posters. You also had book design and package design. And it was the first time like people got a sense of like, oh, graphic designers don't just make posters. So pretty amazing. Here's the postcard for the show on the left, the pamphlet on the right. Here's some of the work from the show. On the left, work by Hayakawa Yoshio, and on the right by Hara Hirome. On the left, work by Ito Kenji. On the right, work by Kamakura Yusaku. On the left, work by Ito Kenji, and on the right, work by Kono Takashi. And that show was like massively, massively influential. It was very, very, very popular. I mean, at the end of, I think it ran for a month, and like thousands of people flocked to that show. So people were really into it. Another thing that went down, that magazine Kokokukai, or Advertising World, it resurfaced briefly from 1949 to 1950 as a publication called New Kokokukai. But it folded really briefly as the publisher wasn't sure how to approach post-war graphic design. And to fill in the void, another magazine emerged called Shogyo Design Zenshu, or The World's Commercial Art. Only 5 issues were released. They're really beautiful. You can still find them today. And they continued this example of showing foreign work and Japanese work together. And designers such as Paul Rand, A.M. Cassant, Raymond Savignac, and many others were featured within. Notably, both Yamana Ayao and Sugira Hisui were involved in that. So these guys, like these first superstars, they stayed the course. They were always in there and always involved for the rest of their lives. Then in 1953, the first issue of Idea magazine came out. So Idea was kind of the child of Kokokukai and New Kokokukai. And Idea is still around today. Probably most people here have at least seen a copy. In my opinion, it's still, the best magazine in Japan on graphic design, but I'm a contributor, so what do I know? So early issues cataloged the Japan Advertising Artists Club and documented the developing early post-war Japanese graphic design scene and work. The 1960s were a tremendous time for Japanese design. 1960 itself was a momentous year. The World Design Conference was held in Japan, and it introduced movements like metabolism as a hybrid architectural and design movement. And foreign designers like Saul Bass, Joseph Mueller-Brockman, and Max Huber attended the conference. And it's interesting because incidentally, both Joseph Mueller-Brockman and Max Huber met their wives at the conference. And Mueller-Brockman's wife? No, Huber's wife's father was one of the first generation of Japanese designers. So we had this marriage of, like literal marriage of Swiss high modernism and early Japanese modernism, like co-marrying. So, I don't know, that's just my conspiracy theory that freaks people out. So these are some of the materials from the conference and the conference itself. The next big thing that happened was the Tokyo Olympic Games. And Japanese officials stated that they wanted to, quote, show the world that Japan is not just a country of cherry blossoms and geishas, but to demonstrate that Japan has been rebuilt after the war and willing to connect itself to the Western world. So here we have Kamakura Yusaku's logo for the 1964 Olympics, which was the result of, can you guess? A logo competition. But it was a private competition, but still a logo competition. Here we have the losers of the competition, all high-ranking members of the Japan Advertising Artists Club, and who, even though they lost the logo competition, they were still involved in the design of the materials for the Olympics themselves. So it says here, Takashi Kono and Iko Tanaka's work. And then designs by Inagaki Yoshiro and Sugiura Kohei. So Sugiura Kohei to me is super interesting. He went on to teach at Ulm, kind of like Bauhaus 2.0 in Germany, and he was poised to be the first Japanese international mega rad designer guy. But then he was like, "What? That's terrible. I'm more interested in Asia," and he just basically turned his back on that whole scene and started creating inroads between Chinese, Korean, and Japanese and Taiwanese graphic design, and still does so today. He's a really both amazing designer and really amazing in terms of trying to cultivate pan-Asian harmony and communication, which is something that, because of the legacy and history of Japanese imperialism, it's quite rare and very honorable. Super nice guy. Here we have some of the other losers. So on the left, there's no credit, but it's by Kazumasa Nagai, and then another submission by Kono Takashi on the right. So this was really the first time that a completely totalizing approach was used to designing the Olympic identity materials. And they created, basically, there were two teams that used two sets of guidelines, kind of like proto-identity manuals, so that the implementation of the Olympic logo, pictograms, color, and typography were used, instead of the designers kind of reinventing the wheel each time. So the use of pictograms was implemented for the first time in Olympic history with the Tokyo 1964 Olympic Games. So I was born in 1972, so I missed all this. But as a visual person, I think the first Olympics I remember was Lake Placid, and I was just always oh yeah, the Olympics equals pictograms. Because if before pictograms, it was just they would have to be skiing Anschluss, ski in katakana, listing 40 languages or whatever to tell people the ski slopes were that way. So this just, I don't know, it's really, really, really important. And these pictograms were designed by a team led by a designer named Yamashita Yoshiro. And one of the members of that team was a designer named Yoko Tadanori, who to some people here may be the only Japanese graphic designer you might be familiar with. So these pictograms were really inspired by Otto and Marie Neurath's isotypes. And it's just, having these pictograms in the Olympics is just something that has continued again and again. It's great because you can still find some of these pictograms floating around Tokyo, particularly East Tokyo. This women's bathroom sign is absurd. It's amazing. It looks like a flower, but you'll still see it around town, which is really great. Here they are back in the day, applied as signage. And the design scheme for the 1964s were really seamless. The two teams were called the Design Studio and the Design Colloquium. They were the ones that set up the two different systems. And this idea of designing systems for identities for the Olympics is something that Lance Wyman and his team would knock down in Mexico 4 years later. Or knock out of the park, not knock down. So color and typography were fairly consistent across the Olympic identity, as was the application of kind of mid-modern aesthetics. The exact amount paid for design fees is not clear, but basically Kamakura Yusaku designed these 4 Olympic posters. Here are 2 of them, which are very iconic from the history of Japanese graphic design. But basically, he had to give away like basically pay photographers most of the money that he received. And he basically received probably about the equivalent of like $500 for designing the 4 Olympic posters, which was pretty good back then. And if you think about the contemporary Olympics, like do you guys know they had that logo design competition? The guy that won that, he designed 2 logos. He basically got 10 grand. So we got 5 grand for the Olympic and Paralympic logos. So probably if you adjust for inflation, it's about the same amount of money. It's pretty fucking terrible. And then it's interesting too, because the 1964 Olympic identity also spread into cigarettes as well. So we see like Peace cigarettes, which helped bring designer salaries up, being kind of sublimated into the Olympics as well. The next big event, and don't worry, we're almost done. It's cool. It's like 9 more slides. The next big event, and this one's really important, was an exhibition called Persona, which was held in 1965. We had all these folks, Owazu Kiyoshi, Fukuda, Shigeo, and you can read the rest. I hate when people read this stuff that's on the screen. It's always painful. They had this exhibition showing basically the next generation of Japanese designers, as well as, you can see vertically on the right, a bunch of foreign designers, and then Kamakura Yusaku, the designer of the 1964 Olympics, was included as well. So he was kind of like, the godfather of design. Here's an ad for the exhibition. Again, it was held in a department store. Here we have a number of the participants. I'm pretty sure that the guy on the farthest right is Kamakura Yusaku, and I'm pretty sure that he's wearing a toupee. So I'm just letting you know. So this is what the exhibition looked like. And again, this was immensely popular. It was only held for a week, but it drew hundreds of people every day for the week it was open. And what this show was most notable for was it was the public debut of Yoko Tadanori's posters. And they were a mashup of historical influence, personal narrative, and social commentary. Remember the soap from the beginning of the lecture? The ornament, the Baroque hyper-decorative elements? He was pulling a certain amount of basically iconography and images from that packaging and just putting it directly into his posters. So see this peach here on the lower left? That peach is pulled directly from some old Match advertising from like, I think 1904 or 1908, and bringing that into work into 1965. But also, it's not just appropriation, it's really personalized through a specific lens. His posters were dynamic, shocking, sensual. There are people making out on that poster. Proto-psychedelic. That's the other thing. Like, people are always like, oh yeah, his work was psychedelic, but it was before the psychedelic stuff. And like early psychedelic or psychedelic stuff in general, if it said like the Grateful Dead, and then there was a skeleton with some roses, like that's profoundly literal. But this stuff was quite poetic, and it mixed, visual metaphor, collage, allegory, and really got away from the like problem-solving approach of very modernist problem-solving approach that Japanese design had been stuck in for the previous decade and a half. His work offered something deeper, the deployment of an innate personal skew on graphic design, combined with the acumen of an individual who had worked in screen printing prior to professionalizing as a designer. He knew what he was doing with the materials. By going further out than being merely poetic and decorative, by making the jump to utilizing metaphors, metonymy, allegory, collage, and chance processes, along with many other methodologies, and slamming it all together into highly dynamic work, Yoko created work that, looking backward, disrupts the continuum of graphic design history as we know it. The first time work that we consider, and is considered in history books, to be postmodern was not until 1977. This is 1965. So that kind of destabilizes our sense of history. That's kind of scary. Kind of like, like when I was in high school, like headbanger dudes would wear shirts where we were metal when what metal wasn't cool. It was like a Metallica shirt. And like he was postmodern before such a term existed, predating what had commonly been accepted as nascent postmodernism. His work was laden with meaning. And he really brought Japanese graphic design into the era we are now. And that sun, this is the part where I bring it home because I blame the sun. So that sun was pulled from vintage packaging. It was a national symbol of Japan that was commodified and then sold to others. And he brought it back into the work, and it was about this interplay of meaning. So to bring it 360, I blame the sun as well. So thank you very much. This presentation is a culmination of years of research. Yeah, it'll be a book real soon. It's like 5, 6 done. So thank you for listening to me talk. Questions. No questions? Sweet. All right. Bye. No. What's up?
So, with the Mexican Olympics, something that really interesting happened was you saw a lot of people who witnessed the change and kind of hijacked the identity to make literal protest material. And I was just curious, I've never seen it before, but do you know is there that kind of material that exists for the 1964 Tokyo Olympics? Because I know there was a lot of change. There was the whole issue with people kids getting arrested in Ginza for how they were dressing.
Right.
Was there designers that were literally responding, or just people in general literally responding to this very modernist identity for the 64 Olympics?
I am unaware of any. There might have been, but I don't know of any. Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's good when you don't know and just say, I don't know. So. Yeah, but I really am unaware. So. Yes. Were there any women graphic designers? Oh, that's rough. All right, I'm going to speak in sweeping stereotypes now. What's up, Alvin? Alvin Young, everybody. What? No, sorry. Feminism, as we conceive of it, is not the same as feminism in Japan. There is an extreme glass ceiling in Japan. Even today, women are not recognized in design or in industry in general or in finance in a way that men are. There were women doing graphic design, but they were never allowed into the boys' club. It's still increasingly in Japan, there is a huge female workforce, but for their names to be brought to the forefront is quite rare. So it's a pervasive problem. Yes.
I've noticed that on a lot of publications, the name of the magazine or book was always in English. Most of the publications. Why is that? Are they very oriented towards English-speaking countries? Or?
It's there's a word in Japanese, funki, which means atmosphere. Do you know Kirin beer?
Yeah.
Okay, so Kirin beer, if you read the English, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's all about providing an atmosphere of authenticity, of quality, of internationalism, of just trying to say oh yeah, this is accepted by people the world over. So yeah, it's that kind of thing. It's something that's still done today quite often.
Because those magazines and books were actually meant for their own people, not?
Yeah. Yeah, but folks can read the alphabet. Yeah. Another question?
Yeah, I was actually curious if I think it was you who in a previous writing talked about it was you or you who shared it. You were talking about how with the Olympics that's coming up, there's the further expanse of globalism and homogenizing graphics in Japan, where we might lose some of the more authentic signage and icons. And I was curious if is there anyone that's started putting efforts into maybe trying to preserve those older icons or
I think that's one of the things. There's a writer formerly based in Tokyo named Sophie Knight who talks about how basically change is the ethos of Tokyo, of like knocking down old things and building new things, much more than preservation of old ideas. So, but at the same time, like there's a publication for everything in Japan. So like, shit, like give me an obscure thing. I don't know.
Women's hiking, there's magazines.
Yes. Women's hiking, but only for women aged 19 to 26. And then women from age 26 to 34 have their own one, and then 34 to there's a publication for everything, and things are hyper documented. I was listening to a lecture the other day by a collaborator of mine named W. David Marks, and he talked about how, like, if you look at the history of Japanese fashion, like, not only would they document in fashion magazines fashion from that time, but then there would be these micro interviews with editors of those magazines explaining why they made those choices. So there's this meta documentation as well. So, and the thing is, like, though there are very few publications about Japanese graphic design of worth in English, in Japanese, it's just like, it would fill up this whole room. So it's just taking the time to find that stuff. But yeah, there's loads of collections of stuff. But yeah, I don't think folks are so big about preserving in like the actual objects per se.
I don't know if anyone else has a question. I don't know. I find that kind of interesting because, like, in comparison, I know that, like maybe in like I've read that like in Tokyo, like it's constantly changing, like urbanism. But then like there's things like the Echigo Sumari, like art triennial, where the whole purpose of it is to like preserve this like area that's been forgotten. And so like,
is it about preservation or is it about economy building?
That's true. But I guess like I don't know. I hear people sometimes refer to the fact that like at least like I forget who exactly, but they were comparing the fact that like a lot of Japanese art is based in this unconscious preservation, or at least this like unconscious like just working with what they have instead of like reaching out to the new. I don't know. Maybe it's like a comparison of like where the person grew up in relation to like what's going on now. I think it was Kenya. I think.
Okay. It's tough because that kind of wasn't a question.
I know.
It's
sorry.
it's
I'm
just
making
like
this into more of a conversation.
yeah, it's tough because I mean Kenya Hara is the contemporary writer through which most people are familiar with design, but he has a very specific lens and agenda. So yeah, I mean like he makes pretty stuff. It's cool. So yeah, sorry that was a total non-answer
No, it's
in response. All right, word.
Non-question. That's what I deserve.
I'm curious why you moved to Japan, and could you repeat what your design firm does?
Okay, I went for love and I stayed for the food. And then I found love again. My design firm does identity, or our core is identity. We do corporate identity, interior design, type design, editorial direction and design. We do a lot of both, let's just say like UI, UX as well. So it's really sprawling.
So the title of this presentation uses either modern or modernism,
Right.
like, and so why did you use that? And like, is our idea of modernism different from a Japanese idea? Like, would they even use that to describe that same body of work?
Yes and no. I think there's more of an insistence upon the avant-garde in Japanese graphic design history. But the thing is also like, man, is this thing connected to the internet? Oh, okay, here, I'll show you a thing. Maybe.
Yeah, I meant you to switch over.
Just try it. Whoa, not that. Whoa. Oh, oh, what? This is crazy. Where did you put the URL? Alright. Is it typing? It is not typing. There we go. Yeah, alright, work. I did workshop at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art a couple of years ago, and I came up with an alternate timeline of Japanese design history, which you can find at, type it in again, if you want to write this down. It's just ianlynam.com/LACMA, LACMA, and yeah, this kind of shows that history it's an alternate history. When we think of modernism, we think that there is one modernism, but it's something that was, art theorists and historians have been talking about for a long time. It's like many countries and parts of the globe have their own variant of modernism.
Yeah, so but I was asking
I'm sorry.
why you chose
That
that.
terminology,
Yeah.
just because this lecture was for foreign audiences or English-speaking audiences
just
to help
sort of able to clarify that
contextualize.
theory
Yeah, totally. Like the book I'm writing doesn't talk about it in Western terms; it talks about it in Eastern terms, and the assorted segments of time that I put in here. So like catch up, and then like after the postmodern period, basically there was kind of like soft modernism, and then like right now we're kind of in this zine explosion, but also like just like in the West we've got a really big reliance on returning to historical styles, because kind of like it feels like either like in the contemporary moment, either like style has been exhausted, or it's like a little bit country and a little bit rock and roll. You've got your like Swiss type with your like shitty French bistro type bass with your like JPEGs that aren't on a grid floating in space, and it's just like that. So like, and that's like what American design looks like right now. Sorry, I'm like ranting as opposed to.
It looks like that in Europe as well.
Hmm?
It looks like that in Europe as well.
Yeah, totally. And in a large part in Japan right now as well. I mean, it's just this global thing. It's the domination of the digital right now. Yes, sir.
So here the typographic club, we have this annual competition, and the judging is always great fun because you get to see the stuff from all over the world. And every year we comment on, oh, that must be from Japan, because the posters are just so artistic looking, creative, unreadable, for various reasons. Not only is it in Japanese, but sometimes the lettering is so illustrative and hard to read. It doesn't matter what language you're using.
Mm-hmm.
Are we seeing something that you think, does that sound like a description of sort of typical graphic design? Or are we seeing something exceptional that would be submitted for a competition here?
I would argue that there is a problem with a lot of Japanese design education in that the way that I personally was taught, I went to California Institute of the Arts for grad school in design, was to like, basically you wanted to make work that was both smart and sexy. Basically you had your good thinking and you had your good form, not good, but basically your thorough thinking and form, and you would put it together. And I think in Japan, still in design education, there's often a disconnect between what we take for granted, this idea of like having really like synthesized concept and form together. So I think sometimes just things get out of control. But it can be really beautiful out of control, but it's also it's a different legacy of thinking about aesthetics as well. The 1990s in Japanese graphic design were predominated by work that was heavily atmospheric. It was work that was more about suggesting that the viewer intimate what the meaning is instead of giving it to the reader wholesale. So, yeah. No, it's fascinating to me. I mean, like, the thing is, like, I'm up here talking, but, and like, in theory, I'm an expert, but I'm still learning. Like, it's fascinating. And like, every day I'm still finding new stuff. So.
Do you speak Japanese?
So, as a foreigner looking back as long as how are you negotiating sort of bringing your design experience or technical results and having to translate that to a Japanese audience? How are you doing that? And how is that
I think I look at things a little bit differently, just because like I was raised in upstate New York, like just like country, super small town. My graduating class in high school was really tiny, but it was a public school. And, like I was just surrounded by woods, so like living like right out. I live in Shibuya in Japan, in Tokyo, sorry, and like right outside my house, like I'll look down from the veranda and there's pavement that's painted with diagonal stripes and just kind of abstract arrows, and then the kind of guardrails that are around are fluorescent green. And it's just so beautiful to me that like kind of taking these plastic colors, I kept trying to bring them back into my work. But at the same time, as soon as I moved to Japan, I contacted Idea Magazine and I was like, I want to work with you and write for you and design stuff for you. And I was lucky enough in that the editor-in-chief agreed. So like by having actual intercultural exchange in the work and in the national design press there, folks are like, oh yeah, we believe this guy. So, and then like, I don't know, my stuff looks different because like I had come from a completely different visual context, but like being in Japan also influences my own work as well. And like, oh, people are awesome there. It's great. Like, I love it there. People are kind.
How would you say the Japanese kind differs from the American kind?
Funny you should ask, because the world of design seems to be becoming increasingly ruled by design by consensus. So they are not so different these days. 12 years ago, it was much more like working with American or Canadian or European clients. You could do much more. But also I'm increasingly doing a lot more digital work or analog work for digital companies, where it's like you have to get all your stakeholders to agree to like, so it's increasingly similar. So. Well, thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it.